So I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I always attend a couple of different meetings a month. I mean, because of Melissa and Joe, you know, I'm always in meetings throughout the country.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll just give another minute here and then make a few quick announcements, and then we will let Amy get to her presentation. But we appreciate everybody's attendance here today. We're in for a great presentation from Amy, so thanks for everybody making yourself available. Just a few quick announcements here before we start. Just wanted to let everybody know that our next 2 meetings will be on Wednesday, November 18th. That'll be Understanding Elder Care Options, and we're going to have Angela Fallon and Ann Markowitz-Reck from Caring People. That'll be at noon. And then our final one of the year will be on Thursday, December 17th. We'll be doing a collaborative peer share, and that will also be around 12 p.m. on noon Eastern Standard Time. So one final announcement here is just in terms of updating the directory, we're going to send around just kind of updates from over the last couple of months. We've had some new attendees. So I'm going to reach out to everybody and just kind of anybody who's attended in the past, just as we compile the directory, just to get an understanding of what business you operate in, what's your niche or specialty, and I guess what's your ideal client profile, just so everybody else maybe who hasn't gotten a chance to meet you one-on-one, if they want to take the conversation to another level, they can do that. So wanted to turn it over to our chapter president and also my father, David Jack, who's going to introduce our speaker for today, which is Amy Wirtz.
Thank you, Matt. Welcome, everybody. For those of you that have never joined us before, welcome. It's great to have you here. And for those of you that have, thank you for coming back and continuing and joining us at our October meeting. We have the honor today of having Amy Wirtz with us. Some of you know Amy, those of you that don't. Amy is a consultant for the Family Business Consulting Group, and their common goal is to protect the integrity of the family and the enterprise for future generations. And Amy brings a diverse range of experience to family enterprises by serving in various roles, such as an exit planning advisor, a collaborative lawyer, a mediator, arbitrator, lecturer, and teacher. Amy is a certified exit planning advisor, and she is an instructor for the Exit Planning Institute in Chicago, Illinois. She is married with 2 children, lives in a suburb outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And today, Amy is going to speak on what is fair in family business, family relations, and succession planning. So it is my pleasure to introduce all of you to Amy Wirtz. Thank you, Amy, for sharing your time and expertise with us today. And the floor is all yours.
Well, I'm glad to be sharing this information with all of you. It will be more fun if you play with me instead of just staring at your computer. So the first thing I'm going to ask is to make sure, raise your hand if everybody can see the chat button on your computer. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, this first question is, how do we balance fair amongst the people that are interested in the consulting gig that we have, right? So here's what I hear all the time. I want what's fair. Now plug in for my kids, for my spouse, for my business partner. I'd like you to insert in the chat what comes to your head as the advisor when you hear that. And for David, I can't see the chat, so if you could read them out, I would appreciate it. It just popped up for me. It just popped up for me.
You have it now?
Yep. So Barbara, we were asking what comes to your mind when you're an advisor and your client says the following: I want just what's fair for my kids, my spouse, my business partner. And as an advisor, what pops in your head, right? Kyle says, my clients pop in my head. So Gary says, my kids talk to each other after I'm gone, Viola, everyone gets what's important to them. Barbara, how do you define fair? What does that look like to you? Good questions. So we're going to dig deep into how do we help our clients actually describe or define the picture of fair at the end of the day. So one of my instructors in collaborative law says, part of this work is visualization. So I'm going to give you some questions, right? So some of the questions I ask my clients are, can you draw a picture of what fair looks like at the end of this process? So that's one way. And I was explaining to David earlier that what happens a lot of times is they can't visualize or describe with words what is fair. So as a consultant, we need to go to the other side, literally to the other side of, can you tell me what it would look like if it wasn't fair? So sometimes we must go to the negative to get the positive. So I want you to think about how much in their face fair is right now, right? So in the United States, we have social justice issues that are being discussed under the guise of fairness. We have an election. We have COVID issues. We have a decrease in medical care for some, it appears that that's being discussed. The media throws around the word fair like it's the word the. I mean, it's so arbitrary and capricious the way that it's being described right now. So right now, our clients are balancing fair. Let me see if I can make this work. How many emails and phone calls are we getting daily demanding our attention? How much new information and changes are being processed that impact fair business system, employee protection? So all these new rules and guidelines based on COVID impact the delivery of fair inside our clients' businesses. It's decreasing production for some clients, increasing production for other clients. It impacts who can come to work and who can't come to work. So this stuff is in the forefront of our clients all day long right now. And how many questions are our clients getting from shareholders and management on, are we getting distributions this year? Are we getting our packages that are based on bonuses or performance? Like, are we missing out on those because we have all these things we can't control? So I can tell you inside of family businesses, dividends are a hot topic right now. Huge, and it is a big cause of friction between those running the business and trying to make things work and those that live off dividend income. And we're expecting dividends. So where do we wade into this work? So these are things I came up with: estate planning, partner exits, employee retention, buy-sell agreements, family support. What do you guys, where are places you see this in your work with families? And I need to see chat function again. It's coming and going for me. Can we stop chat? And guys, because we're small, everybody just kind of talks. Do you mind unmuting them? Where do you see fair in your work, guys? Kyle?
I see it primarily in the actual day-to-day operations of the business, about who has control over which departments or which functions in the business.
Mm-hmm. Mark, how about you?
I'm sorry, you talking to me?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Mark, Ben, Amy, you're in my screen view.
That's guys. You're asking what the issues are that I'm seeing in the
Yeah, what do you,
businesses?
like, where do you wade into that fair topic in your work?
I mean, I try to I try to stay out of it. I have clients that bicker amongst themselves, and I try to stay out of the fray and just remind my clients that it's not an easy process and that they have to be patient with the process and patient with their family members who they share business ownership with.
Okay.
Amy?
Martin,
Yeah,
what do you deal with?
I think the biggest issue that I always see is the difference in opinion between those who work in the business and get compensated and those who are compensated by their share of the business, the dividend issue that you talk. What's fair in terms of dividend versus compensation, bonus? And I find by far the biggest tension between people is over that issue.
It's a big one, isn't it? It is. Gil, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, it's largely about the money. I don't think that, I think that those people that want to assume responsibility typically do so. I don't see anybody ever complaining about somebody else doing the work. I think that most of the time it all boils down to look at all that I've done. And some people actually contribute less and produce more revenue. And
Yeah.
some people actually contribute more. You know, I have a family where one guy basically runs their IT and the other guy general manages the business. They both work equally hard, but the guy who's managing the business is definitely bringing in the dough.
Mm-hmm. But he couldn't do it without the IT.
Yeah, you know, you say, well, I don't have to pay an IT guy $1 million a year.
Hallelujah. Unless you're working for Apple.
Yeah.
Ken, do you have anything to add? Ken Cohen?
I think I'm going to agree with Gil. A lot of times it's the guy with the personality and the sales ability who thinks that he's worth more money. But I think another question is when people want to bring their children into the business.
Yeah.
And what's fair, you know, can everyone join the business or can only the competent ones join the business? That becomes an issue of contention.
So I'm going to go to the chat because I found it. Yay. I have fair and equal are not the same. And that came from you, Ken. And we're going to dig into that. And then Gary Katz said sometimes they don't even see the negative because they've never experienced a family conflict. I think stories help them see potential issues. Yes, and I'm going to sample a story for you next. So thank you for that lead in. I appreciate it. All right, so this is when I'm asking clients to help me understand how they define and apply. So here's the difference. First, I ask them to define, and then I ask them to give me samples of application. So my questions start with their nucleus family first. This is part of my discovery process, okay? When I get to know those that I will be working with, I say, all right, we're going to talk about fair, because no matter what engagement I'm involved in, the word fair comes up. So I'm going to ask you to think about how you define fair for you, your husband, your partner, your children. The nucleus, I start small, okay? And I say, okay, so they always go, well, what do you mean? And I say, okay, pretend you have 2 kids that just ran into the house. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and they're starving. And you go into the cabinet to make them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You reach in and there's only 2 pieces of bread. You're like, poo. So you make the sandwich, and I do put jelly, but the picture didn't have jelly, guys. This is the best visual I could do. And I say, okay, are you the type of person that takes that sandwich, takes the ruler out, measures it, and divides it equally and gives each child the exact same thing so that you do not have to complain and hear the fight that Johnny got more than Susie? Or are you the parent that says, Johnny, when's the last time you ate? And Johnny says, not since breakfast. And you say, Susie, when's the last time you ate? Well, I just had an ice cream cone at Sally's house, but I'm hungry. Now, you know you've got 3 hours to tide these kids over. Are you the type of mom that says, you just had ice cream, sorry, your brother gets the sandwich? Or do you always divide it equally no matter what the facts are? Are you it's visual and weight and it has to be the same? Or are you a fact-specific definition of fair? Now that's very leading. I do that when they cannot even begin to start the conversation, when they don't know what the heck I'm talking about, right? It is a great example because who hasn't had to divide something to eat between multiple people in that situation? Like if it's not your kids, it's going to be somebody, right? So it's contextually easy for the brain to go there, application wise, easy to do. So then I say to them, I have them go more global. Now that's for you. I want you to talk about in your sibling, in your cousin, in your mom and dad, in the larger one, how do they do it? Well, that brings up all kinds of issues. Well, gosh, you know, at Christmas time, my mom and dad make sure every grandchild has exactly the same number of presents. And if one present costs a lot less money than the other, that kid gets a check to make up for the money difference in the presents. Or, hey, you know, in our family, my parents have always been, it's a depends kind of situation. We have a handicapped sister that they're supporting for life. She always gets more, nobody cares. My brother John is a doctor. They don't do very much for him. So it opens up a huge set of pretty neutral conversation at the beginning, but I learn a lot from that. And when I'm dealing with those that are in power or those that are in control of the business at that time, we really talk about how they've done it in the past, and will it repeat in this situation? Does it feel the same for them? Now, listen to what I'm saying. I'm talking about feel. So most of the clients that bring up the issue of fair, it is a gut feeling more than it is a mathematical equation. However, I can tell you that many people look at it from a mathematical equation. It is all over the board. It's not based on sex. It's not based on socioeconomic abilities. It is who they are. Right? So when I get into these conversations, I learn a lot about how clients make decisions. And I also hear a lot about fears for them. Like I've always done it this way, but this time it's so much more complex because I have one child that's working in the business and running the business, and then I have these children outside the business, but the business is all of where the money is. And I'm always been pretty good about balancing fair, but is it fair for this person who's put all this time in to get all of the asset and these to get a lot less? How do I make that fair? So can you put in the chat box, because I have it up now. How many of you feel more comfortable with the dividing the sandwich equally in your own families? Do you divide the sandwich equally, or do you always want to know the facts? So I have one for facts, one for equal, two for equal, one for facts, so we're 2 and 2. Facts, equal, equal, facts, facts. Wow, so we're pretty balanced, right? Now I want you to pretend that those two people that are different are married. And they are now succeeding a business. How do you think that's gonna go? Easy peasy?
Whatever the wife says.
Oh, you met my grandparents. Yeah. So this is interesting. Alan says people who say equally are wrong. Alan, can you tell me more? Alan Mendels?
Yeah, I'm just being a little facetious that we have to be very careful to listen to their reaction and not put our own point of view in there. In other words, to speak to people's listening, to
Mm-hmm.
really help them say what they really mean, because sometimes I believe people tell me what they think sounds right.
I agree. That's why I ask about apply. So the story with the peanut butter sandwich, I say, okay, so if you say you're equal, you always give equal, give me an example of when you applied that. Give me an example of how you do that, right? And it's super, super interesting from a sociological and family standpoint to hear what the kids say after I interview the parents, because a lot of times it's different. It does not match. And what's really interesting is when the siblings have different stories around whether their parents apply equal or fair. And I learn a ton from that. I hear it's equal for everybody but Johnny, who's been to rehab 3 times. He gets whatever he wants, right? Wow, that's like very illuminating for me in the long run, right? So this next slide, what our clients fear is that's not fair. God, I'm sick of that statement. I don't know. I have just gotten out of parenting adolescence and I'm in the young adult stage. I'm almost to the point where I don't hear that very often. Those that are moving into parenting adolescence, that's the reason God invented alcohol. Okay, so you'll hear people whine this all the time. So where do we hear this the most right now? Anybody want to volunteer? Okay, well, golly gee, I hear it in the media all over the place right now through the election cycle, a lot. And I'm ready to throw up about that whine. So some of the things I talk to clients about is when you think about fairness, what are your fears regarding the application of fairness in this setting, right? Whatever we're talking about. And what I hear back is the last thing I want to hear from my kids is that's not fair. The last thing I want to hear from my kids is that after I'm dead, they fought over my process and my decisions not being fair. Then I go into, okay, what does that mean, right? Like, what has happened that makes a fear for you? And most of the time, for the clients that own, it's because they had a very contentious application of an estate within their family history, or their spouse did, and they saw it destroy relationships, and they don't want that repeated, right? That's always a concern. The other thing is I hear fair a lot in transfer of ownership with management teams. Like, I want to make sure that whoever's taking over the business in whatever form it is, that they're fair to my management team, or they're fair to my employees, or they're fair to my community. So it extends out beyond the nucleus of the family. This gets broader than that. So then we talk about, that's good. I'm glad that you're wanting to do this and to be aware, but be conscious of the fact that there are people you are never going to please. So you have to create your boundaries around this issue and what success looks like, and understand that there's always going to be someone who will take the role of a victim and be unhappy, no matter what you do. So understand that you're going to meet most people's objectives and concept of fairness, but there's always going to be somebody that's going to complain. You can't please everybody. So we talk a little bit about that. I also look for constant victims inside of family systems, so I know if I'm permanently going to be dealing with somebody like that. And we talk about reality. We talk about the reality of fairness in whatever setting that we have. And sometimes fairness can't be reached, but we can minimize a negative impact of an unequal distribution by having a transparent process where people understand why things were done the way that they were done. And that's a little bit of what Jeff just typed into the chat. I find that in order for fair to happen, I think it's a great exercise to make stakeholders put themselves in other stakeholders' shoes so that they feel what the other people feel. And that transparent process when we're talking about whatever the sales is or the compensation package is, or if we can be, not in all situations can we be, in estate planning and trust planning, I think it diminishes the fallout after the death or sale if people know why the people that were in power made the decisions that they did. When they find out after the fact from other people, there's less trust and more opportunities for discomfort. So I love this quote. I'm a huge Mark Twain fan. I think this is something that we need to teach our clients, and we need to keep in our heads a little bit for ourselves. So don't go around saying the world owes you a living, owes you a business, owes you an estate, owes you a salary, whatever you want to stick in that. It owes you nothing. It was here first. So many of my clients, I say, where does that fit in for you in this process? Do these people that you're taking care of, do you feel like you owe it to them? Do they make you feel like you owe it to them? Where's your gauge? What's your barometer for doing this? And getting the whys, I think, are important. Some more areas that we use FAIR. Selection of leaders, compensation, dividend, working in the business, not working in the business. That is a huge one in families. Estate planning and promotion of non-family management and pay of non-family management. The other one is board member selection. So who sits on the board of governance? How are people chosen to be on the family council? Who's in leadership on those things? So I was telling my husband that I was going to be doing this presentation and like half an hour before, and he goes, well, you should start with the definition of FAIR. Go to Webster's. That'll tell you what it is. Can you tell he's like a C and a little likes rules? Okay, so FAIR is, by definition, Webster says, marked by impartiality and honesty, free of self-interest, prejudice, or favoritism, sufficient but not ample. Other definitions include, it has rules or standards. It's without cheating or trying to achieve an unjust advantage. Synonyms, I can say that word. So something's just, it's honest, it's equitable. Now, if you really want to see my hair go on fire, ask me if FAIR is equity or equity is fair. It's not. I have been a lawyer since 1992. I became a lawyer because I wanted to find justice. I wanted to find a system where FAIR could be achieved. Do you notice I'm not a lawyer anymore? I don't practice law anymore. You know why? Because it's not real. That doesn't happen in court. It can happen outside of court, which is why I moved to mediation, why I moved to transparency processes where people got to be heard and they got to be part of the resolution. So often those that are in court don't feel heard. They don't feel that there is honesty. They do often feel judged and that there's favoritism. And they often feel like one side is favored over the other. And I've never had a client that got a result from a judge, a written decision from a judge that thought it was just, honest, and equitable. Never. Any lawyers on this call?
I agree.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it, Ken?
They say,
I
a good
would-
deal, they say a good deal is when everybody walks away unhappy.
That's what judges tell you. You know why? Because that's how they go to sleep at night. So the struggles consultants have with helping clients define this. So remember how I started this with it? We kind of talk about, we try to get our clients to define by what is. I'm going to have you, after doing the research for this, really go to what isn't. And the reason is that our clients, human beings in general, have an easier time defining the negative on this subject than they do the positive. when they can. And I remember, Ken, I think you said, use stories a little bit to help them kind of get ready for this. There has been in the last 10 years, a ton of studies done in sociology and psychology on, is fair an instinct versus a concept that's learned? And they're doing those studies with animals in order to get the answer to that question. And what they have found is the ability to judge fair and unfair is actually instinctual, and that we're born with this rather than it's taught. And I was thinking back to being a mom of an infant and whether I found that to be true. And I'm maybe too old to be able to reach that far back in my memory because I have a almost 24-year-old and a 19-year-old. But those of you with small children, I would ask you to just think about that. Do you think that there were times when your infants and very small children were able to identify fair or not fair? Very young, before we were able to develop the frontal cortex of our brains. I'm getting a yes from Jeff, absolutely, right?
For sure.
Yeah, and so, and then think about dogs and cats that you may live with, or even employees, right? So one reason bosses don't want other employees to know what they're making, right? Like I can tell you as a young lawyer, I was absolutely told if I ever told anybody else in the firm what I made, I would be fired, right? Why do you think that is? Let me show you why. Come on. Here we go.
Okay, it's often a white chip, which can be exchanged for food, in this case, a dried food.
So the task is giving the chip to the facilitator.
An identical token for Virgil, but in return, he gets a juicy grape, a far better exchange. Virgil is back for seconds, but this time, Vulcan sees him get the grape. He now expects one too. That's not fair. Virgil is back again. Another grape. Vulcan is losing his composure. This injustice is too much. He was happy with biscuits, but that was before Virgil got grapes. Now he'd sooner have nothing than be short-checked. It's a point of principle.
So then he throws it at him.
Virgil returns, so Vulcan suspects Ted of readying another grape. Must be in there somewhere.
So Kyle, so you know, I actually use these videos in family retreats. And there are 3 or 4 of them. There is one that is 2 monkeys in cages and they move a rock and one gets a grape and one gets a cucumber, and somewhere in the middle of it, the one that got the cucumber that wants the grape starts throwing the cucumbers at the other monkey. And it's pretty funny, but if you think about it, that is how siblings feel when they find out that their counterpart is making more than them, right? So they do more than just throw a cucumber at each other. And that is why my boss told me if I told anybody what I got paid, I'd get fired. Well, then I found out that I was the leader of the domestic relations practice group in our firm. And the two guys underneath me made $25,000 more a year than I did, even though I was in charge. Right? So they don't want us talking. And usually owners want, because they're afraid we're going to start throwing cucumbers and grapes at each other. Right? They're really not afraid of us throwing cucumbers and grapes at each other. They're afraid of them throwing them at the owners. The owners don't want to have cucumbers and grapes thrown at them, right? They don't want to deal with it. And without policy surrounding how we establish pay and why we establish pay and that kind of stuff, it gets very gray, right? So that's what we find is that how we reach process or how we reach fairness in working with owners, partners, employees, management, and family systems is that they actually care more about the process than the outcome. We find that when there is a defined fair process that they are part of and can participate in and understand why we are making the decisions we're making, they're more willing to implement them. And that's when they feel fair has been reached. So you guys, this is the secret sauce on the McDonald's Big Mac. It's the fair. So when we're talking to our clients about creating fair, we should be talking to them about, well, who's involved? How is it determined? Where is it explained? Who is explaining it? And how is it measured? So what is a fair process? Let's see, I have a question. Does it make a difference if the process is defined by an independent mediator versus having a parent or sibling define the process? Can I change? I'm going to change that question a little bit. This was from Kenneth Cohen. I'm going to say that when the stakeholders are part of defining the process and implementing the process, they buy into it more. It is often overwhelming for them to do that work on their own. So having somebody help them develop a process and define a process is usually what they need. And they need the stakeholders to be part of that process for them to buy into it and use it. Does that answer your question, Ken?
I guess my concern is that the person who's got the most power, whichever family member it is, may be the one who's driving the process.
Correct.
So that the other stakeholder children still think it's not fair.
True.
That's my question.
And I think that's why we at FBCG say either it's part of your family constitution and it's already there and it's an identifiable document that they use. It's part of your bylaws and your operating agreement. See me being a lawyer for a minute, right? And you're using it. It's not just taken out as a tool for punishment, but here's something that was created. Here's our guiding principles and we're using it and applying it. And especially in family businesses, it's been taught to the next generation and utilized. They buy into it more. But I do think when it's imposed, like if there's a conflict, Ken, and the owner comes in and says, this is what we're doing, and you're going to do this process, it won't be, they might do it, but there might be more reluctance to adapt it and gain benefit from it than the first example I gave you.
That's why I was thinking sometimes if a third person sort of guides all of the stakeholders to a common resolution, it's, you know, if they don't have the adopted bylaws already, right, and they're doing it for the first time,
right,
that they may need somebody to help them work this out together.
I do that a lot. I do that a lot. Yeah, but you probably do too. Yeah, Ellen?
I'm wondering about the process where a business is running just fine. Let's say there are 4 children, 2 are active in the business, 2 own, you know, they've inherited part, they've been getting dividends. And it's just been fine. Now there's going to be a change, a transition. They want to sell the business. Do you recommend that the non-active children are considered stakeholders and have an active participation, or are they just told, you know, this is what's going to be happening, and the stakeholders are the active children?
Could the moderator mute people for me? I would say to you, you're going to love me. I'm going to do the lawyer always answer. It depends. I recommend probably 8 out of 10 times that the non-participating children be involved. And the reason is, and that doesn't mean that they have a decision on the sale, but that what is occurring is communicated to them. The plan and why the reasons are communicated to them, that they have some sort of voice or their concerns are at least taken into consideration. So what I say is there are people who have a say and there are people who have a vote. That's different. Excluding those who should have a say often really screws up the lives of those who have a vote. That's been my experience. There are some people who have a say that could never productively participate in any kind of communication. So there are reasons not to include people, but more than not, in my experience, inviting people to the table to be educated and to have some sort of a say is important for the process of family harmony and execution in the long run. That's been my experience.
Very
Now,
good.
I'm sure there's people that could give you examples of why that's not a good idea. And that's why I said 8 out of 10 cases. I'm doing one right now. The siblings, the parents did not want to include all the siblings, and the siblings that were working in the business said, oh, please, mom and dad, please include them. Otherwise, our lives are going to be HE double hockey sticks. You excluding them will make it harder on us. Please let Amy include them, why we have a neutral. Does that make sense, guys? A little bit? So we need a process that's identifiable, consistently and equally applied. So here's the deal. Anyone that has dealt with kids or siblings or the law knows that rules are only as good as they're applied. So we can go through the process of creating due process, but if it's not applied equally and consistently, it won't matter. I think that's one of our jobs as consultants that work with business owners, to teach them that, to help them understand that and help them do it. There needs to be a voice for all. And again, I teach transparency. I think it's critical for the success of processes. And that doesn't mean you just give everybody the sale document, and it doesn't mean that they get all details, but there has to be some level of information to create harmony and for things to move forward. And we need to communicate the decision. Part of what I do with business owners is to process with them how, when, what, and why we are going to communicate the decisions we're making. So I worked with a group of 20 shareholders last year, of which 4 were fighting like dogs. They just, and it was stopping the business production, and it was really hard. And the other 16 were confused as to what was going on. And we did some really difficult conversations and some in-depth interviews and assistance with changing the dialogue and helping them transform their style and what they were arguing about. And my idea was that these 4 that were having a problem were going to take what occurred and put it into a neutral third story to share with everybody at a meeting. And then have outlined the questions that needed to be answered and the decisions that needed to be made as a total group after they were able to align on what was going on. And they chose to not share that information, but just share that they had healed and forgiven each other for their hurts. And no matter what I did to tell them that that was not going to work, they did not want to get into the, you know, a third party explanation of what occurred. And lo and behold, we had a big meeting and everybody was confused. Can't imagine why. And they kept saying, well, I'm glad you guys have forgiven each other, but what are you forgiving each other for? Why are we all here? And what next? So basically they told all the shareholders they wanted to not co-own businesses together anymore at the end of the day, with no reasons why, no explanation why. And oh, by the way, the decision of 4 of them to say, I don't want to own together anymore, impacted all 20 of them because they owned 6 businesses together as 20 shareholders. So how do you think that went over? It was challenging, and it's still challenging. So, you know, they're working through it, but they had to go beat their head against the wall that they actually had to be transparent. They couldn't sugarcoat what occurred. They couldn't hide it and skip that step. And that's that transparent process with explanation. With explanation. The explanation you can't skip. So we find that governance allows for a lot of these processes to occur and helps define and give systems to owners of closely held companies how to apply FAIR, and it gives them bumpers. I think of it as bowling with bumpers, right? Especially in the beginning. So we look at board of advisors, board of directors, and family councils to help us do that. And, you know, I think we have to teach our clients that we need to anticipate these problems and set up these processes before stuff happens. And if you know that there's going to be times when we need fairness, when we need to have these conversations, then it's nice to have outside opinions. It's nice to have a family constitution. It's nice to have forums where we can talk this through with intention and assistance. So the other thing that helps with this is policies. How many of your clients, raise your hand for me, grit their teeth and sigh when you say, we need to have a dividend policy, right? Policy for especially 1st to 2nd generation businesses make people's heads want to come off their shoulders. I actually used the word, we need to establish governance with a client last week that's first going to 2nd. She goes, I hate that word. Don't ever use governance with me again. That is a swear word with me. I'm like, oh, okay. This woman took a business from out of her basement to making it almost $1 billion a year business. She has 20 locations, hundreds and hundreds of employees, but she hates the word governance. Really? Wow. That's a true entrepreneur. Governance means she can't do what she wants. That's how she sees that, right? So be careful. I'm going to share that lesson. I said, so what words would you put around it? Well, we need entry. When can someone enter? When can someone leave? How do we determine who works at the business? How do we determine pay? How do we determine how much money goes out? And I'm thinking to myself, okay, that's all governance and policy, but okay, we'll call it whatever you want to call it, right? So, you know, these things, these policies are what helps give us a way to create and implement fair process. So it's not arbitrary. So employment policies, retirement, compensation, dividends, loans. Yes, I still have companies that give their employees loans. Little tiny family companies. What to anticipate. So we teach our clients what to anticipate in application and how to create these things. Ownership rights, ethics, publicity, ownership responsibilities, family behaviors, families. So what if a family member's in need? So what if we have a policy that's dividends only this, you only give dividends when X happens, when the company's making over Y, and it's divided in the following manner. Well, what if somebody has a special need? Are we ever going to make exceptions? If we're going to make exceptions, how are those exceptions determined? Who makes the exceptions, right? in order to keep it process fair at some level. So that's my ideas on fairness. I would love to have some questions, dialogue around this subject. Jump in.
Amy, if I can ask you, normally with dealing with a family business that is going through a transition or a succession, when are you brought in and when would you like to be brought in the process?
I'm usually brought in when the clients are fumbling for a way to get it done. So fumbling from the standpoint of, you know, we've been talking, so a lot of advisors call me and say, I have this family, I have been working with them for 15 years. For year 5 in our review, we have talked about handing ownership or leadership of this company down to their sons or their nephews or whoever, and I can't get them off the dime. Can you help me talk to them? That's my most common lead, okay? The other is, Amy, I have a family, I got a call from this client and they are struggling. They have 4 kids, they can't decide who to put in charge, they're afraid to make a decision for fear of never seeing their grandkids again or having some sibling war. How do you do this? Would you spend an hour with them and talk about what you do to help them get through this, right? The other thing is families that are very proactive. So our organization, the FDCG, does a ton of client education events. We speak at Transitions West and East, which is a convention for family business owners that is run primarily by the owners, and not very much marketing done by professionals there, and it's a peer-to-peer learning opportunity. It's put on by the Family Business Magazine. We also, personally, our consulting firm does 2 client education events. This year we're doing You Want to Be the Family Director, What's It Like to Be a Family Director, and lots of education on that. And we have family business owners that are our directors teach to other family business owners, as well as some of our consultants. We do a lot of governance seminars, and those are actual in person most of the time. But we have a ton of free webinars. If you go on our webpage, we do a lot of marketing through education, and there are free webinars that you can find on tons of subjects like shareholder distribution policies, employment policies, picking the next leader. How do you go from sibling ownership to cousin ownership? What does a company look like when it has 4th generation ownership? What are the policies and issues surrounding by that? How do you start a board of advisors? I mean, there's just tons of stuff in there. Lots short articles, free webinars. You can send links to clients. So I get a lot of work from that as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions or comments on the concept of teaching fairness or working through the issue of fairness with clients? Yeah, Alan.
Number one, I thought this was tremendous, and I define tremendous as having things that you share that are transferable, that, you know, I can use to run with.
Yeah.
2 questions. One is, if you'd been asked, would you have shared these slides?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I will send it in a PDF to David, so he can distribute it to those who want it.
Great, but to speak
Or
to
you can
the group,
email me and I'll send them directly to you, whatever you want to do.
you know, I mean, just to speak to the group quickly, I wish that when we have meetings, that if the person was willing to share their slides, that we were sent it ahead of time, because the way I would have handled it is I would have printed them and taken notes. You just gave us so much information, Amy. It would have been great if I could have done that. The other question for you is how, and I'm guessing that it's a little bit better and easier for you now that everybody's into Zoom, but how do you usually participate in meetings? Do you fly out to New York, New Jersey, or is it done via Zoom webinars? Or
well, pre-COVID, I went to the clients wherever they're at. Most of the time they wanted me physically there. Now it's changed. I was just telling Matt, is it Matt? David, Matt and David, as I was getting on, that I'm now doing a ton of work by Zoom. And I'm doing family mediations by Zoom. And I told them, if you'd asked me a year ago if I'd ever do a mediation by Zoom, I would have told you, hell no, there's no way. But it works. And sometimes it's even better because they're not in the same room and they feel safer. So it's really different. I mean, it's really, really different. I'm onboarding 2 new clients. Well, one's an old client that came back and one's a brand new client. They're only 4 hours away, and I went there and spent 2 days with the family. That is my preference. And the reason it's my preference is because typically when I'm in a room with someone, I see more and hear more. And since 70% of all communication is nonverbal, I read the situation better. That's my preference. Can't do it all the time, but that's my preference. Last summer, the 20 shareholders that I was telling you about, in the month of July, I was home 7 days for that group. I went to 4 different states to do interviews with them. And then I held 3 meetings and multiple phone calls and Zoom meetings with them. Bigger the group, the more work. Which is, duh, that's not science, it's just numbers, right? Yeah, Gary?
So, Amy, this is Gary Katz. So I'm going to add something to your peanut butter sandwich example.
Yeah.
So this is just from my personal experience. I have one child that will not eat chunky peanut butter and one that will just eat smooth. So to be fair, you'd have to cut the sandwich in half with half chunky and half smooth peanut butter.
Absolutely. Well, actually, you take each piece of bread and cut it in half and then put the right peanut butter in it, right?
I'm just adding to it that makes the definition of fair. Just adding to that, it could be even more complex. Some like jelly, some don't like jelly. Some like strawberry, some like grape jelly. So the whole thing, in term is fair, that just shows how complex for just a simple thing, how fair can be extremely complex. That was just my observation.
Amen. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. If anybody else has any issues or questions, please don't hesitate to call me. And I can tell you, Alan, part of the issue with emailing slides to those in the group is we as presidents and vice presidents, leaders through EPIs, do all of this work through the main office. All these announcements you get, everything goes through the main office. And so we're kind of at the mercy of their people getting it to you, which is typically why the slides go out through the speaker afterwards for those people that want them. The speaker then emails them out as part of the process. But we can address that with EPI as well, Alan, ahead of time. Okay? Anything else? Thank you, everybody. Thank you for showing up.
Much. Great presentation.
Thank you for participating.
We really appreciate your time. Everybody have a good rest of the month of October, and we look forward to having you join us for our November 18th meeting on long-term care. So thank you, everybody. And again, Amy, thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.
Thank you. Great presentation.